I looked at my son across the dinner table and I thought, he has his mother's eyes. Same shape, same color, like river water in October. And then he opened his mouth. Nobody asked for your opinion, Dad. We're not doing this your way anymore. I set my fork down. I did not raise my voice. I had not raised my voice in 63 years of living, and I was not about to start at my own dinner table, in my own house, in front of my own grandchildren. I picked up my glass of water, took a slow sip, and looked at my daughter-in-law across from him. She was cutting her steak, and she did not look up. She smiled at her plate like she'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. That was a Tuesday in March. By the following Monday, I had already spoken to my attorney. Let me back up. My name is not important. What's important is that I spent 31 years as a civil engineer. I built bridges. Actual bridges, the kind cars drive over, the kind that hold. I retired at 60 with a pension, a paid-off house in Asheville, North Carolina, and about $740,000 in savings and investments. My wife, Lorene, God rest her, she passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. 7 months from diagnosis to the end. I was there every single day. After she died, the house got very quiet. My son called more often after she passed. He and his wife had been living in Raleigh, renting an apartment, struggling with the cost of living. They had 2 kids, my grandchildren, a boy of 7 and a girl of 4. I loved those kids more than I could put into words. When my son suggested they move in with me, just temporarily, he said, just until they got back on their feet, I said yes without hesitation. I want to be honest about this. I was lonely. The house had 4 bedrooms and I was rattling around in it by myself. I thought it would be good for everyone. I thought it would be good for me. They moved in on a Saturday in late October. By Thanksgiving, my daughter-in-law had rearranged the kitchen. I told myself that was fine. She cooked more than I did. It made sense. By Christmas, she had told me politely but firmly that she preferred I not watch certain things on television when the kids were around. I told myself that was also fine. I was flexible. I was a guest in my own home, which I did not say out loud. By February, my son had asked me to co-sign a business loan. Now here's where I made my first real mistake. He had an idea, a sports nutrition supplement company. He'd been researching it for 2 years, he said. He had a partner lined up, a guy named something I've since forgotten, who had experience in e-commerce. My son had passion. He had enthusiasm. He had absolutely no business plan that I could see. I told him I wanted to look at the numbers first. He said there was a time-sensitive window with a supplier. I said I needed a week. He said I always did this. I always made him feel like his ideas weren't good enough. My daughter-in-law said, from the kitchen doorway, he's always been this way. She didn't think I could hear her. Or maybe she didn't care. I co-signed the loan for $60,000 because he was my son, and because Lorene would have wanted me to believe in him, and because I was lonely and I didn't want to be the kind of father who held his son at arm's length. That was the second mistake. The business failed inside of 14 months. I won't go into the details because the details are embarrassing for him, and I'm not writing this to embarrass anyone. What I will say is that the partner pulled out, the inventory didn't sell, and the $60,000 evaporated. Because I had co-signed, I was liable. I covered it. It came out of my savings. My son said he was sorry. My daughter-in-law said the market had been unpredictable. Nobody offered to pay me back. They were still living in my house. By this point, it had been almost 2 years. Little things had been adding up for a while. The way my daughter-in-law spoke to me when I asked about the household schedule. Patient, slow. Like she was explaining something to a child. The way my son would end conversations about money by saying, "Dad, you have plenty. Let's not make this a whole thing." The way I had somehow stopped sitting at the head of my own dinner table without anyone ever asking me to move. My grandchildren, I want to be clear about this. They were good kids. They were not the problem. When I was with them, when we were doing puzzles or I was reading to them at night, things felt like they were supposed to. But those moments were getting smaller and less frequent. My daughter-in-law had started suggesting, very kindly, that the kids needed more of a routine and that me keeping them up late disrupted things. I started eating dinner earlier to avoid the evening tension. I started going to bed at 8 o'clock, in my own house. Then came the Tuesday in March. The conversation that I told you about at the beginning. We had been discussing the upstairs bathroom renovation. My daughter-in-law wanted to redo it entirely. New tile, new fixtures, a rainfall showerhead that cost $800 by itself. She had a contractor coming on Thursday. I had not been told about the contractor until that morning. I said calmly that I thought we should talk about the cost before anyone came out. The house was mine. The renovation would be paid for by me, presumably. That was when my son said what he said. Nobody asked for your opinion, Dad. We're not doing this your way anymore. There was a silence at the table. My 7-year-old grandson looked at me. He had his grandmother's eyes too, that same October river color. And for a moment I saw something in them that I did not want to see, confusion or maybe recognition of something he was too young to name. I picked up my glass of water. I took a slow sip. I set it back down. All right, I said. And that was all I said. I went upstairs early that night. I sat on the edge of my bed, in the bedroom I had shared with Lorene for 28 years, and I thought for a very long time. I thought about my father, who had worked on a loading dock for 40 years, and never once let another man speak to him the way my son had just spoken to me. I thought about what Lorene would have said. I thought she would have said, "Hal, you know what you need to do." She always called me Hal, even though that's not my name. It was just her thing, and I never questioned it, and I would give anything to hear it one more time. I called my attorney the next morning from the parking lot of a grocery store, because I did not want to be overheard in my own house. Her name is Vivian Crane, and she has been my attorney for 20 years. I told her everything. I told her about the co-signed loan, about the house, about the renovation that was apparently happening whether I approved it or not. She listened without interrupting, which is why I have always trusted her. When I finished, she said, "What do you want to happen?" I said I wanted my house back. She said, "Then let's start there." She advised me first to document everything. The living arrangements, the loan, the ongoing costs I had been absorbing without formal agreement. I had already been keeping records. I had a spreadsheet going back 14 months. Groceries, utilities, the loan, incidental things I'd paid for that were never acknowledged. Total came to just over $91,000, not counting the $60,000 loan I'd covered. Vivienne also advised me to get a full accounting of what I had, where it was held, and whether any of it had any exposure I didn't know about. That was when I found out that my son had, at some point, been listed as an emergency contact on one of my financial accounts. Not with any actual access, but it made me uncomfortable. I had that changed. I also changed my will. I want to be careful here because I am not saying I cut my son out of my life. I am saying I made decisions about my assets that reflected the reality of my situation, rather than a hope about the future. My grandchildren remained as primary beneficiaries through a trust structure that Vivian helped me set up. My son was listed for a specific, limited amount with conditions attached. My daughter-in-law was not included. None of this was done in anger. I want to be clear about that. I was not angry that Tuesday night. I was something else. I was clear. The next thing I did surprised even me. I called my old college roommate, a man named Corbett, who I had barely spoken to in a decade. Corbett had retired to a small community in coastal South Carolina, a private membership community, actual membership required, the kind of place where you had to be sponsored by a current resident to join. He had mentioned it to me 3 years ago. I had said, "Sounds nice," and then done nothing. I called him now. He said, "I've been wondering when you'd call." I visited the following weekend. I told my son I was going to see an old friend. I did not give details. He did not ask for any. My daughter-in-law said, "Don't forget the trash goes out Thursday." I was leaving on a Friday morning. The community was on the edge of a barrier island, 40-something homes, a shared marina, a clubhouse that had the best coffee I'd had since Lorene used to make it. The people there were in their 60s and 70s mostly, retired, interesting. A former federal judge, a woman who had run an art gallery in Chicago for 30 years, a man who had captained a container ship. Corbett introduced me around and nobody asked me to move from where I was sitting. I put in a membership inquiry before I left Sunday afternoon. While that was being processed, I started moving quietly. I was not sneaky about it in any dishonest way. Everything I did was legal, documented, and done through proper channels. But I did not announce it. My son had made it clear that my opinions were no longer being solicited in my own house. Fine. I stopped offering them. I contacted a property management company about the Asheville house. The market was good. I got a preliminary valuation that made me sit back in my chair for a moment. Then I made a decision that I had been circling for weeks without landing on. I was going to sell it. I know some people will read that and think I was being rash. It was the house where my children grew up. It was the house where Lorene died, in the bedroom with the window that faces the maple tree she loved. I thought about all of that. I thought about it a great deal. And then I thought about sitting at the foot of my bed at 8 o'clock in the evening because I didn't want to be in my own living room. And I thought about my son's voice at the dinner table, and I thought about my daughter-in-law saying, "He's always been this way," from a doorway in a house that had my name on the deed. Lorene was not in that house anymore. She had not been for 4 years. I had been trying to keep her there by staying, and it had not worked. I listed it. The same week I listed the house, I had Vivian send a formal notice to my son, not threatening, just factual. It outlined the living arrangement, noted that the property had been listed for sale, and gave a 90-day move-out timeline, with the offer of a modest relocation assistance payment as a gesture of goodwill. Vivian drafted it in the least aggressive language possible. It was a business letter. It was the kind of communication that made everything formal and real. My son called me 11 minutes after he received it. I did not answer. I had already learned, from one too many conversations that ended with me feeling worse than when I started, that a phone call was not always the right format. I texted him, "I think we should talk in person. I'll be home Sunday evening." And then I drove back to the coast. Those few days at Corbett's spare room, waiting, were some of the strangest and calmest of my life. I sat on the porch every morning with coffee and watched pelicans. Corbett didn't push me to talk. He'd been through his own version of something like this. Different circumstances, same sense of having woken up in a life that had quietly become unrecognizable. We played chess in the evenings and he beat me badly every single time, which was at least consistent. I drove home Sunday. My son and daughter-in-law were waiting in the living room. The kids were apparently at a neighbor's. The energy in that room was the kind that has been building for a while and trying to seem like it hasn't. My son started. He wanted to know what I was thinking. He wanted to know why I hadn't talked to him first. He said this felt like a betrayal. I let him finish. I did not interrupt. Then I said, "I remember a Tuesday in March when I was told that nobody asked for my opinion and that things weren't going to be done my way anymore. I decided to take that seriously." He said that was different. I asked him how. My daughter-in-law said I was being manipulative. I looked at her for a moment, just a moment, and I said, "I'm selling my house. That's not manipulation. That's a decision about my own property." She said they had built a life here, that the kids were in school, that we were supposed to be family. I said, "I agree with all of that, which is why I'm offering 90 days and relocation assistance. I could legally give 30. There was a silence that went on long enough that I heard the refrigerator hum. My son said I had changed. I said, "I've been this way my whole life. I'm just done being quiet about it." The house sold in 6 weeks. The buyers were a couple from Atlanta, both architects, who fell in love with the porch and the maple tree out back. I thought Lorene would have liked them. I thought she would have said they had good taste. I thought a lot of things in those 6 weeks that I didn't say out loud to anyone, because some things are private, and grief is the most private thing there is. My son and daughter-in-law moved to a rental in Raleigh 2 weeks before the closing. The move-out process was civil, barely. My daughter-in-law stopped speaking to me directly during the last stretch. My son and I had one more conversation, out in the driveway on a Saturday morning, that started defensive and ended, unexpectedly, with something closer to honest. He said he hadn't realized how much had shifted. I said I believed him. I told him I loved him. He said he loved me too. We were both standing there in the cold, and neither of us quite knew what to do with that, so we shook hands, which was strange, but it was something. I moved into the coastal community in early June. I have a 2-bedroom cottage with a screened porch and a view of the water between the trees. I make my own coffee every morning at 6. I sit outside until the pelicans start working the shoreline, and then I go inside and make eggs, and then I do whatever I want. My membership here was sponsored by Corbett. The former federal judge, a man named Aldous Prentice, taught me to sail on a 22-foot sloop, badly at first, then less badly, then competently. The woman from Chicago, whose name is Wileen, runs a weekly dinner rotation, and her pot roast is the best thing I have eaten in years, and I have told her so directly. These people are my age. They have their own histories. They do not need anything from me except company, which I give freely. My grandchildren came to visit in August. My son dropped them off on a Friday and picked them up Sunday. The four of us built sandcastles and caught small fish from the dock and watched a thunderstorm roll in from the south. The three of us on the porch wrapped in old blankets I'd bought at a general store in town. My grandson asked me if I was happy here. I said yes. He seemed to believe me. My son and I speak on the phone about twice a month now. It is not the relationship I wanted when I imagined what family would look like at this age. But it is an honest one. That is worth something. That is, in some ways, worth more. I am 64 years old. I have a pension, and a cottage, and a view of the water, and a friend who beats me at chess every Thursday evening without apology. I paid for a wedding and a failed business and $40,000 worth of groceries and utilities that no one ever thought to thank me for, and I am not angry about any of it anymore. I was given a gift that March evening in the form of my son's words across a dinner table, though he did not mean to give it. He told me it wasn't my house anymore. He was wrong about that. But he was right about something else, without knowing it. It was time for me to find out where mine was. I think I have.